that birthright citizenship very seriously. It's frankly ridiculous.
We will eliminate the Hyde Amendment and restore funding for abortion care for Medicaid patients and other federal health programs.
We have to think about the jobs, right? Because the reason this happens is there are a lot of jobs in our community that, like it or not, for better or worse, Americans are not willing to take. Who do you think is mowing our beautiful lawns in Somerset County? We don't usually ask, but a lot of those workers are undocumented. There are just not a lot of kids, from Montgomery High.
The Labor Department just last week proposing a rule that would make it easier for government contractors to discriminate against LGBTQ employees.
Freedom prospers when religion is vibrant and the rule of law under God is acknowledged. An informed patriot is what we want.
Welcome to American Family Radio's Focal Point, the home of muscular Christianity on conservative talk radio.
Muscular Christianity.
Where we relentlessly explore the intersection of truth and politics.
The trouble with our liberal friends is not that they're ignorant. It's just that they know so much that isn't so.
Now, here's your host, Brian Fisher.
Howdy, and welcome to this Friday edition of Focal Point on American Family Radio Network. I am Brian Fisher, your congenial, convivial, and amiable host.
As always.
And you, as always, are my highly intelligent and congenial and convivial listening audience. Welcome to Focal Point, the home of 1 hour of cultural apologetics, defending the application of the truth of God's Word to contemporary life. That's what Focal Point is all aboard. Welcome aboard the USS Focal Point. It's a warship, ladies and gentlemen, not a pleasure cruise. We're taking on the strongholds. We're training the big guns on board the USS Focal Point on the strongholds of Satan, those strongholds of deception and error and lies and deceit that he has raised up to keep people from the knowledge of God. Now, we want people to know God. These strongholds that Satan has put up, their lies, every one of them, they stand between people and God. We want people to know God, what's in their way, the strongholds of Satan, these errors, these deceptions, these lies that he's told, and God and people to believe. So we are out to pull down those strongholds. The Bible assures us that the weapons of our warfare are powerful in God for the pulling down, the demolishing of these strongholds. So we're going to spend the next hour demolishing strongholds. Get ready to go to war. Now, I want to turn our attention at the very beginning of the program today, as we characteristically do, to the Word of God. Now, remember, I've said frequently that the Scriptures represent our nautical charts by which the USS Focal Point is guided. Our commander's on the bridge. The Holy Spirit is our navigator. I'm your loyal, cheerful and humble first mate, but it is the Scriptures that serve as our nautical charts, and that's why we always want to begin their program each day. We're using a schedule you can find at pray.afa.net. Go there, bookmark it, open it up first thing in the morning, read the passage, pray the prayer, pray.afa.net. Now, the reading has taken us today to the end of Luke chapter 6, in the middle of what is found in Matthew as the Sermon on the Mount. So Jesus here is talking about some very practical issues that have to do with life, and he begins with the very familiar words, judge not, and you will not be judged. Condemn not, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give, and it will be given to you. Now, what Jesus is talking about here primarily is our relationship with people. And his argument is, Jesus' teaching here is that in general, people are going to treat us the way we treat them. So people are for us like a mirror. We see ourselves reflected in them. If we are gracious, if we're non-judgmental, in general, we will get that in return. Now, not absolutely. There are exceptions to everything. But in general, if we are kind to others, they in general will be kind to us. If we are patient, we get patience in return. If we are forgiving, we will get forgiveness from others in return when we ask for it. If we are generous, we will get generosity in return. But on the other hand, Jesus says, if we're harsh, if we are quick to criticize, if we hold grudges and resentments, people will begin to treat us in the same way. If we are friendly, we will get friendship in return. If we care about people, they will care about us. If what happens in their lives matters to us, what happens in our lives will matter to them. But if we get irritated and cranky over every little thing, then others are going to withdraw. They're going to keep their distance because we have a log in our own eye that we cannot see. Everybody else can see it, but we don't, we can't, or we won't. But Jesus says if you do this, then you will see clearly how to take out the speck that is in your brother's eye. So we're all supposed to be speck removers. You get something in your eye, it can be distracting, it can be painful, it can be irritating. In those days you had to have someone to help you because mirrors were very crude, so they weren't much help. If you had a speck in your eye, you had to get help. Somebody had to come alongside you and help get that thing out of your eye. Now, if you got a speck in your eye, you do not want somebody coming at you with a pair of pliers saying, here, let me at it. I'll get that speck out of there in no time. Your eyeball might come out with it, but trust me. So if you want somebody with kindness in his eyes and a careful touch, then we want to be kind and gentle with people. For Jesus says, with the measure that you use, it will be measured back to you. Now, when our kids were young, we lived in Boise, and we lived not too far away from an ice cream parlor when our kids were really young. We used to load them up on a little chariot that I would attach to the back of my bike, and we'd go for a family bike ride. We'd always wind up at Delsa's ice cream parlor. And they had ice cream in these big, huge cartons, and you'd pick the ice cream you wanted to put in your cup or in your ice cream cone. And I started noticing something. I started noticing that if there was a girl behind the counter, you would get exactly to the half ounce what you were supposed to get and not a sliver more. But if there was a guy back there, he'd stick some ice cream in your bowl. If it looked kind of stingy, he'd cram some more in there. He'd just keep cramming until he was satisfied that you'd gotten enough ice cream. So what I started doing when I had my family with me, I'd start loitering there until a guy was available to take care of us. I liked the guy. I liked the guy who would pour his ice cream into my cup and my family's cup like that. We will receive, Jesus says, if you're generous to others, you will get back a good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over. That's my kind of ice cream parlor. That's my kind of individual. So Jesus says here in this passage, judge not. Now this is basically the only Bible verse that most people know. Used to be John 3:16, but regressives quote, judge not, lest you be judged all the time. But realize this, when they quote that verse to us, they are violating it the minute that they do it. They are disobeying that command the minute that they do it because they are using it to criticize. They are using it to condemn. And so, we ask them, are you saying it's wrong to judge other people? And they will say, yeah, that's what Jesus said. Well, then why are you doing that to me right now? If it's wrong to judge people, wrong to condemn them, why are you doing that to me right now? I've never had anybody give me a good answer to that question. Now, Jesus says down in verse 43 that no tree bears bad fruit, nor again does a bad tree bear good fruit. Each tree is known by its own fruit. Figs, he says, are not gathered from thorn bushes. Grapes aren't picked from a bramble bush. Sometime once back in the day when we were living in Boise, somebody gave me an almond tree. Now, I love almonds. I love them in the shell to crack them and eat them. I love them raw. I love them however you have it. I love nuts of all kinds, including almonds. In fact, I have almonds almost every morning, mid-morning, as a little mid-morning snack. So
and
I
on
could
the
not
golf course.
Come again.
And on the golf course, I know you always sharing almonds.
Oh yeah. I'll take a bag of almonds with me when I play golf. Yeah, because it's healthy, it's good for you, and all that. So I couldn't wait for this almond tree. I planted it right next to the driveway. Couldn't wait for it to start producing almonds. So after a year or two, it did. So I pulled an almond off that tree, and I could not crack it with my regular nutcracker. In fact, I had to put it on the driveway and hit it with a hammer to get to the nut that was inside. And when I did, the fruit was bitter and it was inedible. So I thought, well, maybe it just needs a couple of years to season out. So I tried it again the next year and the year after that. Same exact result. Had to open them on the driveway by beating them with a hammer. You tasted them, it tasted terrible. So I finally realized I had a bad tree. I'm never going to get good fruit out of that tree. Now Jesus says something in verse 45, the good person, this is Luke 6, out of the good treasure of his heart produces good. The evil person, out of his evil treasure, produces evil. Well, listen to this. Out of the abundance, literally out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. So when somebody speaks, that's something that's coming out of his heart. It's already there. It's in there. It's just overflowing into his speech. You know, you ever have something ever have something just pop out of your mouth? Something nasty or mean or cruel or cutting? Now, I know that's never happened to Jeff or to Rob, but it has happened to me. And what Jesus is saying here is if that happens, that means that there's something lurking down there in my heart that's cruel and nasty and mean. Why? Because it is out of the overflow of the heart that the mouth speaks. You know what? You know how the only way to find out what's in a teacup? You got to jostle it. If somebody's carried a teacup across the room, you want to know what they've got in there, you bump them. Whatever's in there spills out. And that is that's the same thing that happens with our mouths. You want to know what's in a guy's heart? Just listen to him talk. If the language is crude, if it's vulgar, if it's off color, then you know that that's what he has been storing up in his heart. If on the other hand, things that he says are pleasant, they're positive, they're friendly, they're uplifting, and they're encouraging, those things are coming out of his mouth, then you know that that's what he has been storing up in his heart. You know, there are people I know who started drifting from God and now are a long way from God. You know how you could tell they were starting to drift? Just by listening to them talk. I've seen it with my own eyes. I've heard it. It shows up in their language. Their language starts getting more crude, more vulgar, more biting, more caustic, more off-color. That's how you know that something's getting twisted up in their hearts. But then Jesus finishes by saying this, everyone who comes to me and hears my word and does them. No, not just enough. It's not good enough just to listen to the word of God or read it or study it. It only works if we obey it. Jesus says, I will show you what he is like. He is like a man building a house who dug deep, laid the foundation on the rock, and when a flood arose, the stream broke against the house, could not shake it, because it had been founded upon the rock. So the reality is, he's saying, look, storms in life are going to come. Nobody's exempt. And we can know that somebody has been building his life on the rock when he gets hit by a storm. If he stands firm, stands strong, stands tall, we know he's been building his life on the rock of the Word of God. Well, if you'd be kind enough to join me, let's take these themes that Jesus taught us and take them to prayer. Lord Jesus, I pray today in your name for myself. I pray for my family. I pray for everyone within the sound of my voice right now, for everyone in the Focal Point listening audience, man, woman, and child. I pray for our elected officials, for our mayors, for our governors, and for our president. And I pray that you will set us free from a critical spirit that judges others, so that we may not be judged by you or by others. Keep us from condemning others, so that we may not be condemned ourselves. I pray instead that we will forgive those who have hurt us, so that we may be forgiven. Prompt us to give generously to others. When we do, give back to us as you promised, a good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, and poured into our laps. Remind us that the measure we use will be measured back to us, and show us how to use a generous, open-handed, open-hearted measure with others. You teach us that everyone who is fully trained will be like his teacher. And so I pray that we will learn from you, and that you will bring into our lives teachers and mentors who will be examples of forgiveness and generosity rather than bitterness and criticism. Protect us from hypocrisy by showing us how to take the log out of our own eye first, so that we may see clearly enough to remove a speck from our brother's eye. I pray that we will not just hear your words, but put them into practice, so that we may lay the foundation of our lives on the rock. I claim your promise that even when the floods and torrents of life strike, They will not be able to shake us. Amen.
Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth.
This is Focal Point with Brian Fisher on American Family Radio.
Howdy, and welcome back to Focal Point on American Family Radio. Brian Fisher is my name. Focal Point is the home of muscular Christianity on conservative talk radio. Rob, I changed my mind. Let's grab clip number R1. This is just a little lagniappe for the day. There's a guy named Remy. He's a libertarian, but pretty clever guy. He's doing a takeoff on the Beatles song, All My Lovin' I Will Give to You. And he is singing this song as if he is a Democratic candidate appealing to voters to vote for them. And there's a guy in this little video whose name is Bob. This is a guy who's got the horn-rimmed glasses, living in the basement. But he's a guy that's been commuting to a community college, paying his own way, and he's finally got himself a decent job. And here's what the Democrats are saying to voters. Let's listen.
All your work wages risen, your debts all forgiven, your child care will be paid for too. Want free parental leave, just takes one vote for me, and I'll give all this money to you. All Bob's money,
Oh, give me a break.
I will give to you.
This is really getting ridiculous.
All Bob's money,
I drink tap water.
if I win, it's true.
You know what? I'm leaving.
All Bob's money. All Bob's money. Ooh, all Bob's money. I will give to
All right, and that's the problem with socialism. Eventually, you run out of Bob's money. All right.
We're all Bob.
We're all Bob. Yeah.
Bob.
All
That was
Bob's
good.
money. All right, I want to. This is a winnable war moment for me. You know, one of my things I'm really occupied with is the whole theory about origins. Where did life come from? How did we get it? How did all this incredible variety that we see around us in life, where did it come from? Now, Darwin had a explanation. He wrote about it, an origin of species, that it all happened by chance. It's all a matter of random mutation, random collision of atoms. They get lucky every once in a while. There's a mutation that occurs that advances life, and so forth and so on over billions and billions and billions of years. Voila, you get life as we know it. Now, the reason I bring it up is I came across a column, and I've got a column that this guy wrote, and it's linked at our Facebook page. The guy's name is David Gelernter. Now, the deal with David Gelernter, this guy is a world-renowned computer scientist. I mean, this guy, he's at Yale, and he knows computer science. He knows science backward and forward, and he has renounced Darwinism. He's a scientist at Yale, and he's renounced Darwinism because it cannot explain what we see on Earth. It cannot explain the origin of life. It cannot explain progressing complexity of life. It's just not there. And so he has rejected it. He's abandoned Darwinism. Here's a brief piece on Breitbart. This guy, by the way, came to the media's attention in 1993. Remember the Unabomber? The Unabomber sent a package to this guy. Ted Kaczynski sent a package to this guy that blew up when he opened it. That was back in 1993. Same guy. Now, this guy wrote this column, say, what if Darwin was wrong? That's the title of his column. What if Darwin was wrong? Some publications have it giving up Darwin. These contain his arguments, Gelernter's arguments against Darwinism. Here's what he says. This is a quote. Darwin's theory predicts that new life forms evolve gradually from old ones in a constantly branching, spreading tree of life. Now, he says, these brave new Cambrian creatures, there was a period of time the biologists called the Cambrian explosion, in which life it just appeared in bunches. It was an explosion of new life forms. And as we'll see in a minute, the real problem is all of these new life forms that had no antecedents, came out of nowhere, are fully formed. There are no missing links that link them to Precambrian creatures, and this is what got to Gelernter. These brave new Cambrian creatures must have had Precambrian predecessors, similar but not quite as fancy and sophisticated. They could not have all blown out suddenly like a bunch of geysers. But that's what the fossil record tells us is exactly what happened. Darwinism cannot explain that. Each must have had a closely related predecessor, which must have had its own predecessors. So you got predecessors to the Cambrian explosion examples. They had to have Precambrian ancestors, and they had to have Precambrian predecessors. But, he says, these predecessors of the Cambrian creatures are missing. Now, Darwin himself was disturbed by their absence from the fossil record, but he thought they would eventually turn up. So Darwin realized the big problem with his theory, no missing links, got no transitional forms, none. But he thought, well, we just haven't unearthed enough fossils. But here we are, 60 years out from Darwin, we now have hundreds of thousands more fossils than we had in Darwin's time. And you know what? We have fewer even proposed missing links. There were some fossils they thought were possible missing links. It turns out that they weren't. Science now has explained these away. And Stephen Jay Gould, he was at Harvard, probably the leading paleontologist in the world during his heyday. He's deceased now. But he had a theory called punctuated equilibrium. And what Stephen Jay Gould said, look, the problem is there are no missing links. There are no transitional fossils. They are completely absent from the fossil record. And he called this the trade secret of paleontology. That's a quote. What he meant by that is we paleontologists, we know that there are no missing links. We know that there are no transitional forms. We are hoping that the rest of the world does not find out. That's why it's a trade secret. It's a secret we're trying to keep to ourselves. We're trying to keep a lid on all of this. And Glertner has just pulled the lid off of that thing for everybody to see. This is what he says. The Cambrian explosion had been unearthed, and beneath those Cambrian creatures, their Precambrian predecessors should have been waiting, and they weren't. In fact, the fossil record as a whole lacked the upward branching structure that Darwin predicted. So he says, I can't be a Darwinist anymore. It doesn't explain. And then he says that it was a further problem for Darwin when we got into molecular biology, when we started getting into the details of how cells work and how genes work, how the genetic system works. And I'll just keep this brief and to the point, but the problem there is that what evolution has to depend on, what Darwinianism has to depend on, are mutations. If you're going to get new genes and more advanced genes, more sophisticated, complex genes, you have to have a mutation. Otherwise, that gene is just going to keep reproducing just like itself. Like begets like, just as the Bible said, each kind reproduced after its own kind. So what Darwin had to say, well, look, that's not going to work. Well, Darwin died before molecular biology advanced. But what evolutionists have to say, well, or what they would say, we can get new genetic material from these mutations. You know, the problem is mutations are harmful to the mechanism. They don't make it more adaptable to life. They don't make it more durable. They don't increase its longevity. They kill it. That's what mutations do. And molecular biologists are recognizing that they kill the organism. They are fatal to the organism. But that's what evolutionists are counting on for increasing complexity in life, and it simply does not work. So no matter where you slice it, look at the fossil record, it doesn't work. No missing links. You look at genetics, it's impossible by chance. In fact, he, in this longer article, he computes the chances. Let's say you had these mutations that happened by chance, and you could kind of engineer all of these mutations. You could not engineer enough mutations to have a realistic chance of getting one single advanced molecular cell advanced gene. It would be impossible. You couldn't do it. There are not enough atoms in all of the world. The number of tries that you would have to make are greater than the number of atoms in the universe. So in other words, ladies and gentlemen, the theory of evolution, the theory of Darwinism just does not work. It is the hoax of the centuries. And what does the Bible tell us? In the beginning, God. You know what Glertner says? This makes a pretty sophisticated argument for a designer. What you see in nature, and the more scientists study nature, the more complex it gets. You know, they thought as they first began to realize that there are cells and there are atoms that make up cells and there are genes that are a part of the life structure, they thought the more they got into that, the simpler it was going to be. And they found out it's completely the other way around. The more they dig in to life as we know it, the more complex it got. So evolution, ladies and gentlemen, is simply impossible. It does not work. Here's what he says toward the end of his column. Evidently, there are a total of no examples in the literature of mutations that affect early development and the body plan as a whole that are not fatal. And he mentions the Drosophila. The Drosophila is just a fruit fly. Now, you can, of course, they're abundant, and you've had scientists that have been messing with the fruit fly since 1901, trying to get that fruit fly to turn into something else. and they've never been able to do it using the most sophisticated, advanced genetic engineering techniques that are available on the planet. They cannot get the next generation fruit fly. They'll get a mutation, they'll work it into the fruit fly genes, and what happens? The fruit fly dies. And they've been dying since 1901. Simply impossible even to engineer. The most sophisticated scientists on the planet cannot engineer a next generation fruit fly because the mutations kill them off before they have a chance to reproduce. And here's what he says. An intelligent designer, this is a scientist at Yale now, an intelligent designer might seem more necessary than ever now that we understand so much cellular biology and the impossibly long odds facing any attempt to design proteins and their genes by chance or assemble the regulatory mechanisms that control the life cycle of a cell. Perfectly consistent with the very first words of the Bible, in the beginning, God. There's your intelligent designer. He created the heavens and the earth. There's your design. You have an intelligent designer behind it. And the best in science now, as confirmed by this Yale computer scientist, the best in science confirms what the Bible has been saying for 4,500 years. Ladies and gentlemen, do not doubt this book. And if you want to read that column for yourself, as I said, I've got a link to it up on the Focal Point, the Facebook page for Focal Point. I encourage you to go there and read it. All right, let's see. We got a few minutes here to squeeze some other things in here. Let me see if I got some interesting stuff that's kind of right at the top of the stack here. By the way, we've issued here at AFA, we have issued an alert to parents regarding 13 Reasons Why. They're releasing the third season of this today. It's available on Netflix. Remember, the first one had such a graphic scene of teenage suicide. And remember, the story was about a teenager leaving behind these recordings, giving the 13 reasons why he or she was committing suicide and why these 13 people had contributed to it. By the way, they had snubbed him or her or whatever the case. And the suicide scene was pretty graphic. In fact, it was so graphic that we got thousands, hundreds of thousands of signatures sent to Netflix. Please pull this series off of your inventory. Well, they didn't do that, but they deleted that suicide scene. Finally, we're convinced by psychologists, psychiatrists, by their listening audience, their viewing audience, this is a bad idea, and they pulled that scene out of season 1. They left season 1 up there, but they removed the graphic suicide scene. Now, season 3 is coming out, and it's no longer about teenage suicide. This plot revolves around teenage homicide. And you got to think, well, where do you go from there? Where do you go from suicide to homicide? What's next for Netflix? We're going to have parental warning for that program. This tells you all you need to know about the bankrupt media, the talking snake media. You know who they've hired? CNN has hired to be a contributor? Andrew McCabe. This is the guy that was fired by the FBI because he repeatedly, not once, but twice, but 3 times, lied under oath to FBI investigators. So this is the guy that CNN wants us to believe is now going to be a credible source for news and commentary.
Well, it seems fitting, doesn't it?
How do you mean?
Well, he's got to go to the fake news network.
Yeah, that's Andrew McCabe, Counterfeit News Network. It is a marriage made in heaven.
That much irony should come with a warning label.
Yeah, that's exactly right. By the way, there's a new movie coming out this weekend called Angel Has Fallen. It's the third in a trilogy, started with Olympus Has Fallen, London Has Fallen, and now Angel Has Fallen. I haven't seen it, so I'm not vouching for it. Please don't misunderstand me here. But the plot is about a Secret Service agent who is framed for being a part of a conspiracy to assassinate the president. So he's got to be on the run from the Secret Service, stay alive, and find out who the real culprits are. But from a review I read this morning, one of the plot lines is that the deep state develops a Trump-Russia collusion to explain everything. It's a total hoax. Could be interesting. Be right back.
Family Radio. You're listening to Focal Point with Brian Fisher.
Howdy and welcome back to Focal Point, the home of the fastest 60 minutes in American media. I'm Brian Fisher, your congenial and amiable and convivial driver for
As
the
always.
Focal Point race car. Anyway, on the home stretch, heading for the checkered flag. Stay with us. Now, let's grab clip number 4. This is on the immigration issue. And by the way, Donald Trump's new immigration policy about keeping families together for the entirety of the asylum process, liberals ought to be jumping for joy. What was their complaint? Trump is separating children from their families. He's breaking up families. This is terrible. This is horrible. This is no good. This is cruel. This is lacking in compassion. Well, Trump's new plan would keep families together for the duration of the asylum process. They stay together in housing that is provided by the federal government until their asylum request can be taken care of. So you would think the left would be jumping up and down for joy, but no, they are not, as you might expect. Now, here is a Democrat representative, Malinowski's his name, never heard of him before today. Tom Malinowski, he's from New Jersey, and and he's riffing here. He's appearing before some fundraiser or meeting with his constituents. riffing on the theme that we need illegals to do jobs that Americans will not do. And this guy's an elitist. I mean, this guy is dripping with elitism. You will hear it in his comments. Let's listen.
And then we have to think about the jobs, right? Because the reason this happens is there are a lot of jobs in our community that, like it or not, for better or worse, Americans are not willing to take. I mean, who do you think is taking care of our seniors? 50% of the elder care workers in the state of New Jersey are immigrants, most of them legal, most of them documented, but certainly some who are not. Who do you think is mowing our beautiful lawns in Somerset County? We don't usually ask, but a lot of those workers are undocumented. There are just not a lot of, kids, from Montgomery High who are going to be doing that full time. You guys are going into robotics, for goodness sake.
So, Rob, you got a reaction to that?
Yeah, my son's been a landscaper all his career, and he would be glad to take those jobs.
Yeah.
Americans will work those jobs. They do every day. I don't know where they come off telling all the Americans, we're not going to do those jobs.
Yeah, these are jobs that Americans will not do. That's snooty, it's elitist, and it's wrong. And he used the example of mowing lawns. He says we got to have illegal aliens because we got to have somebody who will mow our lawns because those are jobs that the Americans will not do. Well, I know that he's wrong because a white guy mowed my lawn from the first time it needed to be mowed. You know how I know? Because I am that white guy. I am that American guy. I mowed my lawn. So that isn't a job that Americans will not do. In fact, they talk about all these slaughterhouse jobs. I've mentioned this before, but every job that liberals tell us Americans won't do, I've done. I've worked picking grapes. I've worked in a raisin factory. I've worked in a tomato packing shed. I've worked in a slaughterhouse. Every job they say that Americans won't take, I've worked at one time or another. So, Rob, you got a follow-up?
Yeah, one more point. If they're hiring illegals to do their yard work, isn't that illegal?
Exactly right.
I mean,
they're breaking the law by hiring these illegals to mow their lawns. All right, one other quick soundbite. This is clip number 5. This is Gayle King. This is This Morning, CBS This Morning, talking to Nicole Hannah-Jones, talking here about slavery. They cannot get enough of this slavery thing. New York Times says we're going back to 1619. 1619 is the true founding of the country because that's when slavery started in America. We talked about this the other day. I've got a column up on it that if we'd followed the Bible, the kind of slavery practiced in America was unbiblical. It was prohibited by the scriptures. So if the Bible had been our guide in 1619, we never would have had slavery. But they want to blame the Bible for slavery, saying that it justifies it and all that kind of. Anyway, here's their conversation.
The thing that's so amazing about this, that makes me so proud, you can look at anything that's happening, just about anything that's happening in the world today and tie it to slavery. You look at the highways in Atlanta, you look at the naming of Wall Street, you look at sugar that we eat. But the thing that stuck out to me was health care, that you can tie health care to slavery. How?
Absolutely. So there's a piece in there about why we're the only Western industrialized country that doesn't have universal health care. And it starts with opposition to universal health care that occurs right after slavery when the Freedmen's Bureau was trying to offer free health care to the formerly enslaved. And there was white opposition to that. And so even today you see with polling that white Americans will reject social programs if they think large numbers of black people will benefit from them. And so the harms of slavery have not been contained because there are millions of white Americans, there are millions of Latinos and Asian and black Americans who don't have health care, who can't get insurance because of slavery.
Good grief. Slavery was terminated in 1865. We're 155 years past that, and they're blaming slavery for the fact that some people cannot get insurance. It's just absurd on its face. But notice this is now their new unified theory of everything. I mean, the left has a unified theory of everything. They've got a theory now that explains everything that happens in our culture. It's a one-word explanation. Somehow you can tie everything to slavery, and there's kind of a competition on the left to find a way, find some creative, innovative way to connect some social problem to slavery, somehow attribute it to slavery. We have this today because we had slavery in 1619. 19. Just absurd on its face. Now here's Donald Trump wants to do something about the birthright citizenship thing, and this is where I want to finish my comments today. This is clip number 1. Let's listen. Donald Trump.
We're looking at that very seriously, birthright citizenship, where you have a baby in our land, you walk over the border, have a baby. Congratulations, the baby's now a U.S. citizen. We're looking at it very, very seriously. I don't know how you found that out, but that's very good. We are looking at birthright citizenship very seriously. It's frankly ridiculous.
And not only is it frankly ridiculous, but it is also flatly and blatantly unconstitutional. And the Constitution itself prohibits birthright citizenship. Here is Amendment 14, which all of this has been based on. We've done birthright citizenship forever, since the 19th century, but it was a misunderstanding, a misapplication of the Constitution from the first day. Here's what the 14th Amendment says. All persons, I'm reading from my copy of the Constitution, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. So in other words, in order to be a citizen of the United States by birth, you have to be subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. And by definition, children of illegal aliens are not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States because their parents aren't. Their parents are not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. That's why we can pack them up and send them home according to the law and send their families right along with them because they are not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. That's just a term that the framers of the 14th Amendment used for citizenship. One who is subject to the jurisdiction of a state is a citizen of that state. And that's why we don't give citizenship to the children of diplomats, because their parents are citizens of a different country. They're not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. That's why all we can do with them is deport them. If they don't commit a crime here, all we can do with them, if they get in kind of trouble, is we can just send them home because they're not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. And I want to go back to the time when this amendment was crafted to kind of demonstrate this to you. So just to tack it down, illegal aliens, by definition, they're illegal. They are not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. They are not citizens of the United States and therefore are not eligible for birthright citizenship. You know, people say, well, diplomats are exempt. Well, the word diplomat does not occur in the 14th Amendment. You won't find the word diplomat anywhere in the Constitution. The reason they are not eligible for citizenship is because their parents are not citizens of the United States, and therefore their children are not citizens of the United States. So if this is not rocket surgery, ladies and gentlemen, so if the children of diplomats are not eligible, are not citizens by birth, then either are the children of illegal aliens. Now, I mean, it's kind of inescapable logic. If the children of foreign diplomats aren't U.S. citizens by birth, how is it possible that children of illegal aliens could be? It simply just does not compute. But a real key question here obviously has to do with the meaning of the jurisdiction clause back in 1868 when the 14th Amendment was written and ratified. 1868, 14th Amendment is ratified, the one I just read to you. So if you want to understand what the jurisdiction clause meant, you go back to the Civil Rights Act of 1866, because what the 14th Amendment did is it elevated the Civil Rights Act of 1866 to the Constitution to give it ultimate protection and protect it from legal challenge. So the Civil Rights Act was passed in 1866, which was the same year that the 14th Amendment was drafted. It wasn't passed until 1868. Remember, all the states had to vote on it, but the Civil Rights Act was actually passed in 1866 by the same people that crafted the 14th Amendment. Now, the Civil Rights Act included a provision to secure citizenship for former slaves, that is, which is to nullify the Dred Scott decision. Here's what the Civil Rights Act, 1866, said: all persons born in the United States and not subject to any foreign power, excluding Indians not taxed are hereby declared to be citizens of the United States. So according to the CRA, Indians who were not taxed were not eligible for citizenship just because they had been born on American soil. Why? Because they were subject to the foreign power of the sovereign Indian nation to which they belonged. Remember, those were treated for purposes of the law as if they were independent and sovereign political nations, the Indian nations. They're not eligible because they weren't taxed. They weren't taxed because they were citizens of a foreign power, that is, the Indian nation to which they belong. So as Ken Klukowski put it, the 14th Amendment only commands citizenship to persons born on U.S. soil to parents who are not citizens of a foreign country. So very simple. If the parent is not a citizen of the United States, a child cannot be a citizen just because they are born here. Now, looking at the debate is instructive because the jurisdiction clause was the subject of a lot of debate in Congress when this amendment was crafted. Senator Jacob Howard of Michigan proposed this amendment because he wanted to make it clear that the simple accident of birth on U.S. soil was not, in fact, enough to confer citizenship. He said this: the jurisdiction requirement is simply declaratory of what I regard as the law of the land already, a reference to the Civil Rights Act of 1866. Here's what he said in the debate leading up to the adoption of the 14th Amendment. This will not, of course, referring to the 14th Amendment, this will not include persons born in the United States who are foreigners, aliens who belong to the families of ambassadors or foreign ministers accredited to the government of the United States. So think about this for a second. So he's talking about the families here. They don't get citizenship just because they're in the family of a diplomat. The diplomats aren't citizens, so their children aren't either. Now, if everybody understood, which is what they want to believe, that citizenship was granted by birth, why did it take an act of Congress in 1922? Remember, Congress, they can grant citizenship to anybody they want. But it took an act of Congress in 1922, 54 years after the 14th Amendment had been ratified. It took an act of Congress to grant citizenship to American Indians because they were excluded as citizens or subjects of a foreign power, foreign nation. Now, John Bingham, Representative John Bingham, he's considered the father of the 14th Amendment. Here's what he said. This is the guy that's the father of the 14th Amendment. He explained the language this way, quote, every human being born within the jurisdiction of the United States of parents not owing allegiance to any foreign sovereignty is, in the language of your Constitution itself, a natural citizen. So if the parents aren't citizens, the children cannot be just because they are born here. You know, one of our family heirlooms is there's actually two documents. The citizenship papers of my great-great-great-grandfather immigrated from Russia. And we've got two big framed copies, very elegant documents. The first one contains his renunciation of his allegiance to the Tsar. He couldn't become a citizen of the United States because he was subject to a foreign power, that is to the Tsar of Russia. He had to renounce that before he could become a citizen. Only then could he become a naturalized citizen of the United States, and I'm glad that he hung with it and became a citizen. That's it for Focal Point this week, ladies and gentlemen. Do not forget to bow low before God, stand tall before man, stand in the gap, and never forget we are fighting a winnable war. See you Monday.
The views and opinions expressed